Good morning, gamers. Here are the best settings for you so you can dominate in Marvel Rivals. These settings will cover not only your game settings, but also your video settings and so much more to tweak the performance of your game and tweak your own performance so you can play to the best of your abilities. And I'm going to explain all what these settings do and so much more. And stay tuned till the very end of the video because I'm going to show you guys a file you can download if you're on a very low-end system to crank your frames up even higher. Now, this one is only available for a limited time, but it does still work at the time of me recording this video, so don't miss out. Anyways, let's dive into the settings real quick. So obviously, when we're in the display, we got target display, primary monitor, usually you might have something else. Display mode, now I have it on borderless windowed because it makes it easier for me to click in and click out. I have my own native resolution that I normally game in here, so there's no point in changing things around. But if you have a lower resolution and you want to upscale it, you usually need to play it on full screen. It will sometimes give you a little bit better performance if you have it on full screen, but generally speaking, I feel like there's not much of a difference between these two, and you're better off on borderless windowed when it comes to UE5 games. When it comes to your resolution here, if you have an NVIDIA card, I've found personally, I have a 4090, that the NVIDIA DLSS seems to be the best. And this is set to quality. I just let it be on the normal one because it looks good, but you can crank out balance or performance to get a little bit more, even ultra performance, get even more quality out of it. But it will look very blurry. Something I've seen some people do as well is use the AMD FSR and setting it to performance or balanced. But personally, I'm on the DLSS train, so we're staying there. You can also turn on the AMD FSR frame generation if you have this available, as this helps gas more out of your PC. You can have low latency mode on if you have an NVIDIA card. I don't have it on right now. I don't feel like it's necessary, but generally speaking, you might benefit from this if you have very stable frames and you want to get more snappiness out of your game. The brightness is very personal. It's up to the monitors. You have your preference. I just have it to the normal one. Limit FPS, I probably recommend turning this off unless your frame rates jump around a lot. If you do have an FPS limited to anything, you want to set it to the highest possible consistent frame rate you have. So let's say you have your frame rates fluctuate between 60 FPS to 90. You might want to set it to 60 because that's the most consistent frame rate. And yeah, theoretically you have more frames to work with if you have it to 70 or 80. But when you set your frame rate to 60, that reduces the chance of you dropping frames, which will affect your performance a lot more. Consistent is always better than just flashy. Show FPS, network stat, these are kind of personal preference. VSync I had on, introduces some delay. If you have screen tearing, you turn this on. I don't, so I don't need to. Scrolling down here, graphics quality, I just set this to low. And then I believe I changed the this one here to low quality, the SSGI global illumination. And low qualities work just fine. If you're on a half decent rig, it is still UE5, so it's going to be a bit laggy. If you want to crank more out of the game, if you have the money and you don't want to do the tweaks we're going to mention later in the video, what you also can do is invest into a better CPU. UE5 games are notoriously CPU bound, which means that they require a lot of CPU power to drive. That's a pretty new thing. If you look a few generations back when it comes to games, for a very long time, let's say the 2010s to 2020s or so, at least when I grew up, it was always common that, oh yeah, the new game comes out, I'm lagging, let's buy a new graphics card. And you would have a CPU that was like 5 years old and it would work just fine. But with the Unreal Engine 5, a lot of games are very heavy on the CPU. We're dependent on a good CPU processor. And if you have spent all your money on a graphics card and you have neglected your CPU, you're definitely going to feel it. And for me personally, that game was the finals, which caused a lot of issues, and upgrading my CPU helped me a lot. So if you have the money, other than obviously just changing these settings and tweaking and whatnot, I very much recommend going out and buying yourself a new CPU if you have the money. But moving on, there's some more settings here we have to mention because it's not just display. Obviously, we have the display settings and performance. We're going to cover more performance later, but I'm going to talk about your performance, how to make you play better. There's some very important settings here that not everyone talks about, which I think are very important to change to make sure you play the best. So starting off, we have in audio, I turn the music off. I just got annoyed with it. Doesn't matter too much. And there is one setting you're looking for in the combat mix. That is over here. It's called, I'll turn this off so you can see what it looks like, KO sound cue. This is a little sound that plays when a teammate is knocked out or killed and when an enemy is knocked out or killed. It's like a positive feedback or negative feedback. It just makes it easier to know what's going on and know whether you should fall back or look over at the kill feed without you needing to preemptively be looking there to scan what's going on. It helps a lot with knowing what's going on in the game by having that added. As for these settings, a lot of these are just preference, but there are some hero specific ones I would consider. These are just the general settings for how the game performs. You're gonna, set up the crosshair however you like it. I like using a dot. A lot of people disagree with the dot, so your mileage may vary. But something you do need to change is the allied health bars. This is off by default, but you want to set it to on. I believe that when it's on off, then you don't see them at all. If it's on default, you see them in certain situations. If you set it to on, they're always on, which gives you a way better game sense. You know what's happening in the middle of a fight. But as far as hero-specific settings go, there's a lot of different settings. I recommend you just go in there and tweak. There's usually I don't think Black Panther has a specific one, but I saw one for Adam Warlock, for example, that has here you could change a healing reticle feedback. Gives a special animation to reticle when healing. Turn it on. You could probably turn that to, let's say, so then you'll get a little bit more feedback when you are playing. The same thing exists for all the other healers. I just had to double check. You also have something like for Spider-Man and let's see, where are they? Both Spider-Man and Venom have this setting. This one is pretty well known by now, but I'll still mention it. But you can, well, first off, you can change your wall crawling completely however you want it. And like you can just go around and click through the settings. You're gonna find a lot of things you might want. I'm not gonna go through all of them because there's like 33 heroes and they all have their own settings for the specific abilities. But some of these are pretty good to know. But the one I wanted to mention is Easy Swing. I'm gonna keep this on because I've grown accustomed to it. But what Easy Swing does is it, instead of automatically calculating and giving you a swinging trajectory in the direction you are pointing, that's what Easy Swing on does. It will, by turning this off, the swing will attach where you're pointing your mouse, and then you can swing however you want to. What this does is, yes, it makes it harder to swing, but it makes it much easier for you as a player to, you get the manual control, and you can actually do some really cool moves that are not possible otherwise, and you'll just feel that once you get used to it, that it is much easier to swing around on both Venom and Spider-Man. I don't have it because I'm lazy. But I probably should start with it myself as well. There's nothing worth mentioning in the UI or communication, in my opinion, or spectating, unless you're spectating. I can't comment on controller sensitivity or whatnot. That's gonna be hard for me to say. But I would say change it as you want. There is nothing really worth mentioning in social. I'm just leaving everything as is. And then there is also worth mentioning, we have the colorblind modes, and they have a really cool tool here just for these. If you hold F1, if you're on PC, you can actually change the colors around a little bit here and see which one works best for you. Personally, I feel like the normal one works best for me, but you can change the intensity, how much it's supposed to change. You can change specific colors. If you start with red for the enemy, you can make him blue or something like that. I don't know if my face blocks it now. It kind of blocks the enemy there. My bad. There you go. To turn some green instead of red, you can play around with it. I've gotten used to the current ones, but I might change it down the line. Yeah, if you need it, that's where you get it. But now let's talk about the one performance tweak that you can do that makes a massive difference in your game's performance. We're talking about insanely huge performance boosts, which are even more important if you're playing on a bad system. As I mentioned previously, this is probably not going to stay in the game for that long. The devs have spoken out against it. It's not bannable per se. You might not want to use it if you're playing a tournament, but more specifically, they're looking for ways to, remove that access to actually do this. But at the time, it is still possible to do it. So I'm going to tell you guys how to do it. Credit goes out to VT Rigshu on Twitter, and then Nekoxus, who made an updated version. I'm going to go over both of them. So it's very simple. In order to enable these settings, all you have to do is download these two files. We're gonna link both in the chat. Just pull this one up to begin with. It's Engine.ini file. It's a little config file you see here that even has explanations on it, so you know what you can change. And as you see here, there's some things you do need to change. For example, it says here, if your GPU supports the LSS, just delete the 4 lines, which I do. So I will just turn this off for myself if I have the LSS. And then there's, again, explanations. You can scroll through what you want. This specific one from Nekoxus is basically a Engine.ini version that doesn't have a graphical decrease. As he calls it, it optimizes your game. But it doesn't disable shadows or make other weird compromises that makes the game look weird. It just makes it run as good as possible. And again, there are comments here to help you decide what you want, if there's anything you would want to tweak or change. And when you do install this, it's very simple. You just pull up your run. This is how I normally do it. Type app data. I'll open a folder, local, Marvel, and saved config Windows. And then you have game user settings at .ini, and you just pull this one in here. I'm not gonna do it because I like my settings already. I might start running this myself, but I'm also planning to potentially play in tournaments, so it doesn't make sense for me to do something that might be a bit dicey. I don't want to risk it in any way. Most of you guys are probably not planning to play in tournaments, so it doesn't really matter. There we go. But if you guys don't care too much about how it looks, you might want to turn off your shadows, or you don't care too much for shadows, or you need to tweak even more frames out of the game. There's one more file here from Rigshu himself. This was the original one that he has updated recently. But this is his Engine.ini that changes just that. It works exact same. You just download it and copy it into this folder. And if you want to change later on, all you have to do is delete the Engine.ini file, and then it will go back as it should be. Simple as that. And hopefully that will help you guys get some amazing frame rates. Again, I might actually start using it myself if I get the green light from the devs. Otherwise, I won't bother. But again, most of you guys are playing tournaments, so I wouldn't really care about it. But anyways, I hope this helped you guys out. If it did, let me know in the comments. Hit the like key, the button, and the subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.